Lore and green Gnosis in the green art. Where do our ancestral traditions, the myth, the legend, the lores, the empirical traditions that have been handed down age after age stop? And where does our personal experience with the plant spirits begin? This is a really important topic because within the greater realm of paganism and neo-paganism and a lot of our sort of earth-based spiritualities that are reawakening, for those of us that are doing that work, there's a lot of discussion and maybe a lot more argument over how to do this all right? And how to do it properly. There are the camps of folk who say that if you are not reconstructing the exact traditions of the ancients to the letter, to the best of your ability, based on, extant lore and all of that, then you're doing it wrong. There are people who say that if you're not pushing the work into the future, being in the moment, being relevant, then you're doing it wrong. So it seems like no matter where we turn, somebody's telling us we're doing it wrong, which is really frustrating. This is an aspect of this work that I personally struggled with for many years because you get so far down your own spiritual path and have these experiences that are incredibly meaningful, only to have somebody say, well, because that doesn't perfectly fit with this 7,000-year-old poem about the experience, you're wrong, right? So very frustrating and a really good way to sort of take the wind out of somebody's sails. So I thought it would be fun to do a class on just this and really open up a discussion about lore, or which is kind of my shorthand for all of our surviving ancestral ways, whether that's coming from fairy faith stories or poetry or the epic sagas or traditions, cultural traditions and customs that have survived in one way or another, not only the test of time, but also conversion and in some instances colonization. So lore, we're kind of lumping all of that into lore. And then our own personal experiences in the moment, what we feel, what we experience, what the path feels like under our own feet. And I want to really start sort of the meat of this conversation with a reminder that we are, to the best of our abilities, cultivating an animistic perspective that when we go back to the roots of all of our earth-based, nature-based spiritualities, our spiritual traditions, animism is at the core. That is the one constant. That's the one thing that, with complete certainty, we can lean into. And even when we're missing the trappings of our specific, cultures, our specific ways, we know that for a fact. We know that to be true. And the foundation of animism is cultivating and nourishing right relationships. So this is ultimately a spiritual path of relationships. It's a way for us to live in the world, part of the world, navigating through many different layers of connection and trying to behave and carry ourselves in a way that adds to the greater harmony of the world instead of taking away from it, by how we acknowledge and honor the many people, human and non-human people, who share their spaces with us. So because the foundation of all of this work is animism, and because animism is a spiritual pathway, a spiritual perspective of relationships, relationships are always going to be super unique. That's what this comes down to, this conversation. That my relationship to any given plant spirit, we'll take juniper as an example, my personal familiar spirit from the green realm. My relationship with juniper may or may not look similar to your relationship with juniper, and it may or may not even look familiar or the same as what we read in our ancestral lores about how juniper was worked with, in various parts of the Celtic world. What I experience from juniper is based on my personal, unique, individual, Gnostic relationship with this person, with this spirit. And so we're always looking for overlap with the lore in our Gnosis, in our personal revelation, our personal experience, but we don't want to limit ourselves to it. And that, I think, is the answer. The answer to, lore or Gnosis is yes, it's both. We actually have the ability to use the lore as a sort of check and balance of safe, sane, and consensual, right? That if I'm experiencing these big revelations, these big downloads, these big teachings from my time with juniper that go directly against thousands of years of empirical tradition around this particular plant, it may be an invitation for me to explore, what I'm experiencing and look at it and maybe talk to somebody else and kind of get out of my head and make sure that everything is lined up. What we generally experience is that our personal revelation, our personal teachings from the spirits overlap or dovetail with the ancestral teachings in a way that gives us some edification. Like it's close enough, it's resonant enough that we're like, oh, I see why they said what they said. I see why this particular tradition around this plant or this particular taboo or lore or medicinal or magical virtue around this plant has been passed down time and time again, because in my work with this plant, I've experienced things that are very similar. They're not exact. Maybe they are. But they're at least similar enough that we know we're kind of walking down a well-trodden path. And we want this because it affirms the fact that the juniper we're connecting to is the juniper of our ancestors, right? That it's the same person. It's the same spirit, the same personality that we are connecting to. And that's, for me, where that sense of timelessness, that sense of an ancient connection to something much older than the era in which I live comes from. Because we do love when things feel old, don't we? We do love when a practice or a tradition, has these just thousands of years of power behind it. But, everything that's old was at once new. And so everything we do now, everything we kind of romanticize and sometimes even fetishize from the past was at some point a new tradition. Somebody did it for the first time, and they did it 99% of the time inspired by their personal relationships with whoever their allies were, whether those allies of the Green Realm or other. So everything new has the potential of being old, has the potential of becoming tradition, has the potential of inspiring the next generation into whatever their ways in this work might be. So we can't get too hung up on what's old, but we do want to rely and lean into what has been preserved and handed down, by hook or by crook from ages past, to really hone our own experiences and make sure that they make sense and make sure that they're in alignment with the ancient tracks that we're walking down, because all plant work fundamentally is ancestral work. Not only are we connecting directly to our ancestors through the plants, but we are waking up ancestral traditions within ourselves, again, working with plant spirits who our deep, deep ancestors would have worked with, right? So when we say that plant spirit work is ancestral work, that's where it's coming from. We are walking on the same earth, the same soil, sort of metaphorically, that our deep ancestors walked on. And this is very important. And that's why when we get into the deeper hedge crossing and spirit flight work of this tradition, we say that the path leading into the Green Realm is narrow, but it is well worn. It is so well worn that the dust under our feet feels like talcum powder, because so many feet have walked down that path over the eons. So a thin path, but well worn. So, lore and Gnosis. What you experience is real. It's meaningful for you. It comes up, it bubbles up from your own internal language structure, and it is a direct teaching from the spirits you work with, and that needs to be honored. The power comes when we're able to take our own personal, individual experiences with the plant spirits and weave them with the lore. Somehow find the ways that they overlap and really affirm the things that our ancestors were doing. And then on the flip side, find ways that what our ancestral traditions were doing affirm what we are currently doing. But ultimately, this is a tradition of relationships. And so when I see people sort of, cutting somebody down because there's no reference for the experience they had with a plant spirit or on a plant journey, or there's no, established herbal or materia medica of why this plant should be worked with in the way this individual has been taught to work with them, as long as it's in a, again, safe, sane, and consensual way. It's very frustrating, and it's telling. It shows that the people doing that cutting don't really understand the roots of their own nature-based spiritualities. The only way you're going to cut somebody down because they've been given something from the world of spirit that is unique for their relationship, that is unique for who they are as a person, that can be carried in a special way by them only, is if you just don't get how it all works. You don't understand the animistic cosmology and the animistic perspective. So we try to be patient with those people wherever we may encounter them, but we recognize they're wrong. That when they try to say, I haven't had that experience with this plant, or none of my herb books say that plant is good for what you're saying it's good for, or, you have this teaching from this plant spirit that doesn't perfectly align to the lore passed down from that plant spirit. So you're wrong, you're canceled. We just have to ignore that and walk away and lean further into the power and efficacy of our own relationships with the spirits, because that is what this is all about. If we were to sum up the entirety of what the green art is about, what our animistic traditions are about, what plant work is about, it's about relationships, period. If you enter deeply into relationship, personal, unique, Gnostic, in the moment, in the present relationships with the plant spirits, you will be given what you need to succeed. Something that I like to remind the folks who come out of the woodwork and cut folks down for their perspectives on plant work is this. Somebody wrote the herbal you're relying on. Somebody had that original revelation, that original teaching from the plant, and wrote it down and passed it on to their apprentice, who experienced it as true. So then they passed it on to their apprentice, who experienced it as true, who passed it on to theirs. This is a empirically sound way of doing things. We call it a traditional way of teaching, that we only hand off what works. If I read something in Greaves or Culpeper or Shendong Pensao and I put it into practice here in my clinic, in my shop, and I'm like, it never works for me. It doesn't feel like a good fit. Maybe at one point, based on who the people were in the communities of these great herbalists, it was a right match, but it's a miss for me. I'm not going to teach it to my students. I'm not going to hand it on. I'm not going to have that chapter be required reading, right? I'm going to realize that we need to adjust. We need to take the inspiration from those herbals, from those teachers, from those traditions, those fairy tales, the lore, the myths, the sagas, and see how we can bring them fully into the here and now. Ultimately, with every passing generation, we are different kinds of people. The medicine that may have been effective even for our grandparents might not be medicine that speaks well to the spirit of who we are right here, right now. So this has to be dynamic and squishy. It has to be able to settle into wherever it's being invoked, right? And if not, it's brittle. It becomes stale and brittle and lifeless, and it snaps easily. And we see this in a lot of the traditions being carried by some of the forced conversion and elitist religions, that all of their traditions, or a good deal of them, are based in one moment in time very, very long ago, or one thing written very long ago, or one thing said very long ago. And there's no room for that teaching to evolve, to stay relevant, to flow like a river. Rather, it gets frozen in time. And so, thousands of years later, people in the here and now are trying to apply this wisdom that maybe just doesn't speak to the world we live in anymore. And it becomes toxic. It becomes claustrophobic, because we are trying to force ourselves into a spiritual mold that is not meeting us where we are. The beauty of animism, the beauty of nature-based spiritualities, is that they are always coming from nature. They are in the moment, they are now, they are happening on the land that sustains us, the sky that covers us, and they are happening from our personal relationships with our teachers, with our human teachers and our non-human teachers and our more than human teachers. So consider, as you do whatever work you're doing, how to hold a deep respect and reverence for lore in one hand, and a deep respect and reverence for your personal gnosis, your experiences, your reality, the gifts given to you in the other hand, and put those hands together, right? Put them together and hold those two things at once in one place. And by doing this, we allow ourselves freedom. We allow ourselves to step into the now and let the teachings flow through us and be relevant. And then we find the spirit of the teachings without being so hung up on the letter of the teachings, which is where so much of the magic comes from.